My name is Per Sjögren Gulve, and very welcome to this science policy webinar organized by the Policy Committee of the Europe section of the Society for Conservation Biology. The presentation is done by Professor Vassiliki Kati from the University of Ioannina in Greece, and it starts in a minute or two. And the title of the talk is Need of Habitat Fragmentation Minimization Policy in the EU for Resolving Roll-Sprawl Wind Farm Biodiversity Loss Nexus, and using case studies from Greece. During the webinar and the presentation, please mute your mic and write comments or questions in the chat. Questions necessary for the immediate understanding or clarification are okay verbally during the talk, of course. We will record this presentation, but not the discussion afterwards. And yes, we're to slide 2 now. And the Europe section has members from 28 European countries and beyond, and is affiliated with the Global Society for Conservation Biology, which manages website and globally focused webinars and other scientific and science society communication. For example, international conferences and the publishing of a few scientifically high-ranked journals such as Conservation Biology, Conservation Letters, and Conservation Science and Practice. The Europe section's policy committee dates back to 2004 and at present consists of 18 scientists from all over Europe. And the mission is to use relevant scientific evidence to advance the understanding for and actions to conserve biodiversity across Europe and in the European policy arena. And it also includes European conservation policies in global context. Now I ask Kiki to continue.
Yeah. So thank you also very much for the invitation and for all of your time to attend the meeting. I will do my best for not to have you get bored. So long-term initiatives of PC Europe, as you can see, it's naturally Natura 2000, primary and old growth forest, common agricultural policy, and the roadless areas initiative that we're going to talk more in detail today. In the first part, I'm going to try to convince you through some scientific evidence on the importance of roads and roadless areas. I'm going to use as an illustrative case Greece, talking about the nexus, the biodiversity, wind, energy, land use nexus, because it's really related to the roadless areas and road problem. And afterwards, we're going to try all together to discuss the tools, available tools in the European Commission, the European Union legislation to integrate these aspects in the policy arena. So first, what is the problem about roads? Okay, we all know that it's something useful. It's something that is related to financial development, but in fact, roads trigger land use change. It is the top threat to biodiversity. Habitat loss, deforestation, land take, landscape fragmentation, land grabbing, all these different notions are really related to roads and land use change. What is really of pivotal importance is contiguous development. That means that after the first cut, after the first road penetrating into wilderness, we have a cascade of very negative effects on biodiversity that it's very difficult to control. Second threat is natural resource extraction, overexploitation, mining, illegal activities, all this connected to human footprints penetrating into natural areas. Climate change, of course, through different ways, air, soil, acoustic pollution, invasive alien species spreading along roadsides more quickly. And all these, they do have a very negative effect on biodiversity. And if I take only wildlife as a case study, we all know what a road means in terms of collision mortality for species, habitat loss, genetic isolation, dispersal barriers, behavioral change, and so on. Most important even is that road sprawl leads to ecosystem function degradation. They are connected to the climate mitigation degrees services, to soil erosion, to hydrological disruption, and the list is really long. Very recently, it came to light also a new report invited by the European Parliament under the title "The Link Between Biodiversity Laws and the Increasing Spread of zoonotic diseases." And yes, it is very clearly stated that roadless areas should be preserved as barrier to spread of diseases from wildlife to humans. And in conclusion with all this, roads are related to all top threats for biodiversity conservation. And they have a very negative impact on wildlife, ecosystem services, and human health. This is why it was a long-term initiative of the PC. We have started in 2007, and there is a long list of activities. I'm going just to present shortly the milestones, as 2011, that it's our first paper. The global importance of roadless areas was recognized in a side event in Rio Plus 20, and organizations such as IUCN, UNEP, Conservation International, and even the Bureau of Indigenous People, they have recognized their value. Afterwards, the roadless initiative gained support even from the transport sector. We come to 2016 that we have the first global map of roadless areas of the world, and we just count and evaluate the fragmentation problem globally. And today we come with two new papers, as you can see, and also our roadless policy paper. And yes, the problem of roadless areas, it is discussed also in the Greek Parliament about excluding wind farm investments and maintaining large roadless areas. Global scientific evidence, it's a lot of literature, of course, but some highlights. Roads have fragmented the Earth terrestrial surface to over 600,000 patches. The negative impact of roads to biodiversity extend to a buffer zone at least 1 kilometer. The length of paved roads is going to increase by 60% at the end of 2050. It's really a lot. And it's not by a coincidence that this really explosive era of infrastructure expansion in human history coincides with the biodiversity crisis and climate crisis. You all know the data from the IPBES report. It's really very negative, all this gloomy picture for the planet. And it's also stated that a key driver behind this deterioration is road sprawl. New ecosystems are going to be open to new threats. This is stated by IPBES. And finally, fragmentation can have time-lagged negative responses. So we can face some negative responses also in the future. In two words, there are many scientists all over the world that they underline the need for a proactive road spatial planning and a roadlessness policy and fragmentation minimization policy at global scale. If we go to Europe, some data, we are living in the most fragmented continent of the world. You can see here a nice map that you can see that really Europe is in the worst level globally in terms of fragmentation. Land take increases in the European Union, soil sealing increases in the European Union, and the problem of landscape fragmentation is prominent and increasing. This is a new index, a very important one, an excellent tool provided by the European Environmental Agency. It's called Landscape Fragmentation Indicator, and it shows that we have an increase of 3.7% at the European scale. And of course, it's acknowledged in the biodiversity strategy, a European Commission document, and the European Environmental Agency State of the European Environment, that we continue to lose biodiversity, and the status and trend of species and habitats of European concern is still not favorable, showing even a slightly deteriorating trend. So these are the data, and I shift to Greece. I go to the local scale now. Why Greece? Why to talk about this? Because there is ample evidence that we live in a biodiversity hotspot. You can see here some numbers. The country has an astonishing biological richness, high degree of endemism. I have to stress that mountain tops and islands are nowadays centers of endemism and evolutionary processes, exactly the areas that wind farms in the future would like to operate. And although our biodiversity is in a better status than in the European Union, it's still not adequate. On the other side, pressures are high. Fragmentation in Greece can be half as in Europe, but is increasing faster. We are in the first position of land take increase in Europe. Soil sealing increases. Construction sites and transport infrastructures are, in comparison to Europe, more intensive in Greece. So we can be one of the richest countries in Europe in terms of biodiversity, but some threats are more prominent in our country. And this is why we undertook a research. You can see here roadless areas in the mountain of Smolikas. I have to state just a definition that when we say about roadless area is a land patch over 1 square kilometer that is at least 1 kilometer away from the nearest road. This is the definition. And we have also developed a very simple indicator, the roadless fragmentation indicator, that just counts the proportion of roadless areas in a piece of land. And here is the results of the research. The fragmentation problem of Greece. We have less than 1,115 roadless areas. And we have 6 large roadless areas that they have remained. The probability of standing in this land patch in a roadless area is less than 5%. The Natura 2000 network has functioned quite well. It has significantly contributed to abate fragmentation and holds about half of the roadless areas. The first results identified these 6 mountainous roadless areas, over 50 square kilometers, that they should be preserved as distinct conservation targets for Greece. And finally, just to say that the indicator, the RFI, was found to be really highly correlated with naturalness. This is the first part of the presentation, presenting about roads and their significance and the importance for keeping roadless areas. I just moved to the second part, the second policy part of the presentation about this nexus. Just to state that this nexus, wind farm, land use, biodiversity, is recognized to be one of the key nexuses globally. And this is recognized in the IPBES and in the science paper from Diaz, a very recent one. We have these 2 climate goals conflicting. Why? Because of land. We have a land conflict. Wind farms, they need land, but they create a range of negative effects to species. And of course, species, they need land. So the equation is very simple. Habitat loss and wildlife impacts lead to biodiversity loss. We have to do something. Again, the case study is Greece. We know because it's a biodiversity hotspot. And on the other side, it is a country with a high wind potential, large availability of public land, a very supportive national climate policy for renewable energy development, and the wind energy sector is currently flourishing in the country. So it's a typical conflict terrain that we need to find a solution soon Are wind farms really causing land take, or am I exaggerating? So these are some data that are not published. It's ongoing research in our lab. You can see just here in the picture that here is a mountain, and here the red is a polygon of a forthcoming wind farm. Here is the new road, access road to go to the wind farm, and here is the land take that we have digitized inside and outside the polygon. And the first results show that the total land take it's about 3.5 more than the usual land take from the globe if we check with other literature. Why? Because of the topography. It's a different issue to sit a wind farm in Denmark and on top of a Greek mountain. So this picture just shows that we have to move fast and to try to find adequate sites to locate wind farms in the future. We do have a problem of land take. Few words about the Greek political policy frame. We have a very ambitious national climate and energy plan that the target is to have a 35% share of renewable energy sources in the national gross final energy consumption. And this is translated to about 7.05 gigawatt of installed power for wind farms. Wind farms are considered to be the core policy, the number one race to achieve the goals. The government, in order to support the climate goals, to support the race development, has speed up and simplified a lot environmental licensing for renewables in the country. And also, by principle, all renewables projects and access roads are allowed everywhere in the country. But this comes to conflict to the national biodiversity strategy, and legislation for nature is weakening. And I'm not at all sure that our national policy is in line with the European Union legislation, for instance, the Article 10 of the Habitat Directive, or even the new biodiversity strategy. And what is even more frightening is that we are now in a transitional period of great risk, because we don't have conservation objectives nor land uses defined in the Natura 2000. This is why also we have a negative juridical process of the European Commission against Greece. We also do not have adequate SERA, that means the strategic environmental assessment at national scale. It is also in progress. And it is documented that even the local scale environmental impact assessment studies and appropriate assessment studies, they are often deemed of poor quality. So biodiversity currently in this consequence, it is unprotected. We tried to solve out this, and here's the concept of our work. Okay, we have to find a solution, but how? Well, we all know that climate change is a big threat. We have to do something. So we need a lot of nature, because nature and ecosystems function as a sink to reduce the anthropogenic emission of the atmosphere, in the atmosphere. And we need a lot of renewables and a lot of wind farms, because they do not produce more carbon dioxide. So both of them, they help us to achieve our climate goals. But on the other side, if we have an uncontrolled spread of wind farms all over without any spatial planning, as it is the case now, we risk to have a biodiversity decline. We risk to have undermined the capacity of nature to absorb dioxide, the capacity of nature to help, to contribute to climate change, addressing climate change. So the idea is that we have to find a way so as to have both, in a way that it is balanced, so as nature contribution to people to continue for our safety and well-being. In our case, we try to have this methodology. First, we have considered the Natura 2000 network as a surrogate for higher biodiversity values. Of course, it is well designed. This is also underlined in the fitness check of the Hatters Directive that the network is well designed. And we also took as a surrogate areas of a low fragmentation index because of the very rich literature we have on the negative impact of fragmentation to ecosystem services and species. On the basis of this idea, we have defined a wind farm free zone in terms of Natura and least fragmenting zones. And the remaining zone is the potential investment zone where wind farm projects are suggested to be prioritized first in the very high, then in high, and then in medium zones of fragmentation outside Natura 2000. We need to have also some rules to make the scenario, the sustainable scenario, functioning. In the operating stage, all these wind farms that they do operate, of course, they continue to operate. All the wind farms that they have a construction permit, they can be constructing outside Natura 2000. All the other wind farms, they should be canalized in the investment zone. And then we try to cross-check our scenario, okay, in terms of all available data of biodiversity, wind speed, land availability, and so on. And of course, the energy targets. And here is, okay, this picture is going to show you the results. The current wind farm power is about 44% of the national target of about 7 gigawatt. Maybe today it's going to be about 50 because we have cross-checked our data using the database of the ministry dated from the March of 2020. Okay, so we expect to have more investments now, even more. The first thing is that we can observe is that if we take the business as usual scenario, if we just follow the governmental policy, we expect to have an increase of installed wind farm power by 11 times, overpassing the national target by 5 times. This is really a lot. On the other side, the sustainable scenario, we do have increase, of course, a lot of increase installed wind farm power, and we still managed to achieve and overpass the national target by 1.5 times. One more thing is that, again, in the business as usual scenario, we expect to have an increase wind farm power by 17.5 times in the Natura 2000 network. This is really a lot. So in 2 words, locating wind farms in the most fragmented land outside Natura 2000 largely achieves the national target of wind harnessing by 2030. Here is a scenario in terms of mapping. You can see that it leaves about 40% of Greece as a potential investment zone. We have cross-checked it with biodiversity data, and it performs very well for nature directives, for important bird areas, for roadless areas, for 3 maps, sensitivity maps we had for raptors and birds. So it provides substantial benefits for biodiversity. And we also cross-checked with data for wind speed in the 2 zones. And it's only 4% less in the blue zones of the investment zone. So it doesn't seem to be really a problem, the wind speed. It seems also not to have important land availability constraints because we can reach these targets, the energy targets, by occupying only 1.22 of land resources in the blue zone. So the scenario is very probable that it can meet more ambitious energy targets as current wind farm applications and meet the targets in the future of 2050 or the revised energy plan of the government under the new increased demand by the Commission to have even more ambitious targets. And of course, in the business sector, at first sight, it cuts investments of many gigawatts. So it's going to be negative at first sight for the business sector. But if we have a closer look at the problem, in the country we have huge reactions currently, very fierce social opposition all over Greece. Because landscape value is lost, cultural ecosystem services are degrading. Local economies, they face risks because many local economies are linked to the landscape and to Natura 2000 value. So we believe that at the end of the day, the scenario is going also to help the business sector because it's going to provide safer grounds with greater social acceptance to wind farm energy sector. The frame of the scenario implementation, I would like just to stress that we all agree that the Natura 2000, it's not a system of strict natural reserves where human activities are excluded. This is true, okay? The approach is to make people to work with nature than against it. This is true, and this is what also our scenario tries to do. It tries to allow people continue to work with nature in Natura 2000 sites. That's why we have all these big reactions. That's why we need a prioritization approach for locating potentially harmful land-consuming projects gradually from less valuable ecological landscapes to more, to start from the most degraded land, let's say. Second, the legal frame of Natura 2000 is fit for purpose, but is poorly implemented, and this is recognized in the fitness check of the Habitats Directive. But this poor implementation is more pronounced in Greece, at least nowadays, this consequence that we are now. And the scenario can have an even better value because of this. Of course, it is as a scenario that provides a very fast and proactive national guideline suggesting potential investment zone, and it does not replace the strategic environmental assessment that we are waiting. It is expected next year. It has been developed and tested over data from the wind farm sector, but it can serve as a sustainable guideline across other sectors, such as other renewable energy, tourism, transport, etc. And finally, it's a bulk of scientific literature that supports exactly the same. I just give you here some idea of what is the most recent papers about it. It has started in the United States, but also in other countries. And we come just a few days before that we have a signed letter by 31 Spanish scientists that they are complaining because renewables in Spain threaten biodiversity. Therefore, it's a more global issue. It's a more European and global issue, the nexus that we try to solve. Finally, I go to the policy discussion. I think that the two key messages out of the two papers presented in this talk is that we should find a way to restrain road sprawl and land take in natural ecosystems in legally binding terms. Exactly as we have legally binding terms for climate goals, it's time to have legally binding terms also for biodiversity goals. And the second key message is that we should better integrate biodiversity in climate policies and prioritize renewables in least ecologically valuable zones. I'm going just to present shortly the frame. You all know the Paris Agreement. The treaty focuses on limiting greenhouse gas emissions mainly, but also recognizes the role of biodiversity in the natural ecosystem to address climate change as sinks of greenhouse gases. We also have United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the United Nations Aichi biodiversity targets that they are going to be revised very soon. Both, we know that our progress is not satisfactory to achieve neither the SDGs, neither the biodiversity targets. And in both legal instruments, the road impacts and road expansion it's really not addressed, it's largely neglected. I have just here in this picture from the science paper how many goals of the CTGs are synergistic with roadless areas. And here they are the Aichi targets. These are irrelevant, but we have only 5 goals that they are really synergistic, conflicting 4 goals and so on. I'm sorry, 11 targets that they are synergistic with the roadless areas. So the points for discussion is how we could integrate roadless areas and land take in the post-Aichi biodiversity strategy targets. I move on and go to European policy that it's most of our interest. Here is the Article 10 of the Habitat Directive, very important because it speaks about ecological coherence of the Natura 2000 network and land use planning and development policies, adequate planning. We also have the European Commission roadmap to a resource-efficient Europe that it has clearly set a non-net land take milestone by 2050, but that is not legally binding. And we also have the European Landscape Convention of the Council of Europe, a very beautiful text that it's not also legally binding. And the idea and the question to talk about at the end is in which way, or if you agree to integrate the non-net land take milestone by legally binding terms in the frame of the Article 10 of the Habitats Directive. Second, if the Landscape Convention could be reinforced in a way to actually help landscape protection management and planning. The European Green Deal is for sure the milestone of the European policy that is going to define our lives the next decade. The first question goes if we can really integrate minimum land take in the forthcoming regulation review of land use chains and forestry, and all the same in the 8th Environment Action Programme, and if both indicators, LFI and RFI, could serve as a tool. If we stick to biodiversity strategy, that it's really most important, I think it's really a milestone and splendid tool that the European Commission has provided us, a very bold instrument for nature conservation. In the first set of commitments, the EU nature protection, the key commitments by 2030, I would like to discuss with you if roadless areas could be integrated in the forthcoming European guideline as a criterion to set up ecological corridors, expanding the network of protected areas. This is the 30 target, the 30% target, so as to increase the connectivity of the Natura 2000 network. And even most important is if roadless areas could be used as a criterion to define the strictly protected zones within the network. In our paper, we have suggested that it's time that Europe moves on and follows the USA example to have the European roadless rule of a minimum 2% of European land set as roadless. I think that in the current legal frame, it is more flexible to integrate such target in the EU restoration plan of the biodiversity strategy. And let me explain you what I mean. Here is the key commitments of the EU nature restoration plan, addressing land take and restoring soil ecosystems. So we need areas of degrading and gamble-rich ecosystems to be restored. Habitat and species should not show deteriorating trends, and they should be improved by 30% at least. I'm sure that people, scientists in the European Union now, they work hard to make this restoration plan in practice. And I'm sure that the idea is the active restoration. That means that we have a degraded land and we try to restore it. Okay, this is very much understood. This is very important, but it's also expensive. It applies integrated parts of the European Union. It has de facto time-lagged positive effects for habitat species, and it's an excellent tool to improve the trend of species and habitats for the 30% FIVR target. And of course, it applied everywhere. I would like to ask you to consider a proactive restoration and to consider the roadless areas conservation. So the roadless areas could be included in the legally binding targets of ecosystem restoration through this proactive restoration term. Why? Because it is equally important. It's cost-effective, it applies in more intact natural parts of the European Union, it can have immediate positive effects for habitats and species, and of course is a tool for the non-deterioration of species and habitat conservation status. I mean that it doesn't make a lot of sense to spend millions of euro to help nature and to restore degraded land, and at the same time to destroy fast, intact ecosystems, very natural ecosystems. Because different parts of Europe, they have different conservation needs. Here is the map that I could click here. It's a very nice interactive map of the LFI that shows the fragmentation decree. And it visualizes the different conservation needs of the different states. The gray zones means natural habitats, least fragmented land. Very low fragmentation index means that we do not have much of roads and artificial land in these areas. And you can see that we have some parts in the Alps, in parts of the Mediterranean, all the Pindus mountain range of Greece, Balkans, Eastern Europe, and Scandinavia. And you can see on the other side that the Central Europe is really highly fragmented. So I have used as well a nudged version of the same indicator in the past, just to show you which countries, which member states could be largely benefited from the active restoration part, really in Central Europe. And here that we have an increased extent of the least fragmented land, we have substantial benefits for Scandinavia, Eastern Europe, and parts of the Mediterranean. Here are the countries, okay, you can see. So the message is that it's equally important to actively restore degraded and carbon-rich ecosystem and to proactively maintain intact ecosystems for no need to restore them in the future. So my suggestion would be to have legally binding restoration targets in the forthcoming guideline, to integrate both aspects, and to let the liberty to member states to decide what the restoration action would be according to their specific needs. So this is my last slide. I thank you very much for your attention. And it just summarizes under this beautiful picture of the Dragon Lake in Chinfi roadless areas. There are, of course, landscapes and areas that we wouldn't like to have lost. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kiki.
The last slide that it can help our discussion led by Per.